The quiet suburban neighborhood of Elmwood Park, New Jersey, had always been a place where people felt safe. The kind of place where kids rode their bikes on tree-lined streets, neighbors waved to each other from their porches, and families gathered for Sunday barbecues. But on the morning of July 17, 2018, the tranquility of this community was shattered when officers responded to a chilling 911 call. Vanessa Ramirez, a bright and ambitious 19-year-old college freshman, was found dead in her uncle's basement. Her body lay crumpled on the cold concrete floor, her face pale, and her neck bore the unmistakable marks of strangulation. The man who called 911, her 34-year-old uncle, Miguel Alvarez, claimed he had found her that way. I don't know what happened," he stammered to the dispatcher. "She's not breathing. Please, send someone." But what initially appeared to be a tragic accident or an intruder's crime would soon unravel into one of the most disturbing true crime cases New Jersey had ever seen. The truth behind Vanessa's death was darker than anyone could have imagined, and it would leave a permanent scar on her grieving family and their once close-knit community. Vanessa Ramirez was the kind of person everyone adored. At just 19, she had already accomplished so much. She had graduated near the top of her high school class and had just completed her freshman year at Rutgers University, where she was studying psychology. Her dream was to become a counselor, to help people who, like her, had struggled with mental health challenges. "Vanessa was the light of our family," her mother, Rosa Ramirez, would later say through tears. "She was so kind, so smart. She had this way of making everyone feel special." Vanessa was close to her family, especially her mother and her younger brother, Diego, who was only 14. She often helped Diego with his homework, encouraging him to aim high and follow his dreams. Even though money was tight in their household, Vanessa worked part-time at a local cafe to help support her family and save for her education. Her uncle, Miguel Alvarez, was another prominent figure in her life. Miguel was her mother's younger brother, and he had always been close to Rosa. He lived just a few blocks away and often came over to help fix things around the house or babysit Diego when Rosa worked late shifts at the hospital. Vanessa had grown up seeing Miguel as a protective, almost fatherly figure. But as Vanessa grew older, her relationship with Miguel began to shift in subtle, uncomfortable ways that she couldn't quite put into words. To outsiders, Miguel Alvarez seemed like a normal guy. At 34, he worked as a mechanic at a local auto shop and had a reputation for being friendly and dependable. He lived alone in a small but tidy house and was often seen tinkering with his car in the driveway or chatting with neighbors over the fence. But behind closed doors, Miguel carried a darkness that few people knew about. He had struggled with anger issues for most of his life, a problem that had only worsened after his divorce 3 years earlier. His wife had left him after a series of explosive arguments, taking their 2 young daughters with her. Miguel rarely spoke about the divorce, but those who knew him said it had left him bitter and resentful. Despite his outward charm, Miguel had a controlling, possessive streak. He often fixated on women, particularly younger women, in ways that made people around him uncomfortable. But because he was family, Rosa never suspected that her brother's behavior could pose a threat to her daughter. Vanessa had always been polite and respectful toward her uncle, but as she got older, she started to notice things that made her uneasy. Miguel's compliments, once innocent, began to feel inappropriate. "You're so beautiful now," he said one evening during a family barbecue, his eyes lingering on her longer than they should have. "I bet all the guys at college are chasing after you." Vanessa laughed nervously, brushing off the comment. But moments like these began to pile up. Miguel started texting her more often, asking about her day or offering to drive her to work. He would show up unannounced at her job or at her house, always with some excuse about needing to see her mother or check on Diego. Vanessa confided in her best friend, Mia, about her discomfort. "He's just being weird," Mia said, trying to reassure her. "Maybe he's lonely, since the divorce." But Vanessa couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. On the evening of July 16, 2018, Vanessa had gone to Miguel's house to pick up some old textbooks he had offered to give her for school. Her mother had encouraged her to go, trusting her brother completely. "It'll save us some money," Rosa had said. "Miguel's always been so generous. Just grab the books and come home for dinner." Vanessa agreed, though she felt a knot of unease in her stomach as she walked the few blocks to his house. She texted Mia before going inside. "Heading to Miguel's to grab some books. Call me in 30 mins if I'm not back." Mia replied with a thumbs-up emoji, not thinking much of it. When Vanessa arrived, Miguel greeted her with his usual charm. The books were already stacked neatly on the dining table, but Miguel insisted on making her a cup of tea before she left. "Relax for a bit," he said. "You're always so busy. You deserve a break." Vanessa reluctantly sat down, sipping the tea as Miguel rambled about his day at work. But as the minutes passed, his tone shifted. "You know, you've grown into such an amazing woman," he said, leaning closer. "You're not like those college girls, shallow and selfish. You're special, Vanessa." Vanessa felt her pulse quicken. She laughed awkwardly and tried to change the subject, but Miguel's demeanor grew more intense. "You don't have to be nervous," he said, placing a hand on her knee. "I'm your uncle. You can trust me." Vanessa froze. The air in the room felt suffocating. "I should go," she said, standing abruptly. But Miguel blocked her path. "You don't have to leave," he said, his voice low and insistent. "Just stay a little longer." Vanessa's heart was pounding now. She shoved past him and grabbed her bag, but Miguel grabbed her wrist, his grip tight and unrelenting. "What are you so scared of?" he demanded. "I'm just trying to be close to you." Vanessa yanked her arm away and ran for the door. What happened next would haunt the Ramirez family forever. According to investigators, Miguel followed Vanessa into the basement, where she had gone to retrieve her bag. He cornered her there, his rage boiling over. "You think you're too good for me?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. Vanessa tried to reason with him, pleading for him to let her go. But Miguel's anger had consumed him. In a fit of rage, he lunged at her, wrapping his hands around her neck. Vanessa fought back, clawing at his arms and trying to scream, but Miguel's grip only tightened. When it was over, Vanessa lay lifeless on the floor. Miguel stared at her body, his chest heaving, as the realization of what he had done began to sink in. Panic set in. Miguel knew he needed to act quickly. He dragged Vanessa's body to the far corner of the basement and covered her with an old tarp. Then he sat down, his mind racing. He considered running, but where would he go? He considered calling Rosa, but what would he say? Finally, he decided to call 911, hoping he could spin the story to make it look like an accident. Miguel Alvarez stood frozen in the basement, staring at Vanessa's lifeless body. His chest heaved as beads of sweat trickled down his face. He rubbed his hands on his jeans, trying to erase the sensation of her skin from his fingers. But the imprint of what he had done wouldn't go away. His mind raced. What now? He hadn't meant for it to go this far, or at least that's what he told himself. It had all happened so fast. One moment, Vanessa was yelling at him to let her go, and the next, she was on the ground, unmoving. He paced back and forth, muttering to himself, Okay. Think, Miguel. You can fix this." But deep down, he knew there was no fixing it. Miguel's first instinct was to hide the body. He grabbed an old tarp from a corner of the basement and draped it over Vanessa. The sight of her face, pale and lifeless, made his stomach turn. He knelt down beside her, as if to check for a pulse, but he couldn't bring himself to touch her again. Minutes turned into hours as Miguel sat in the basement, paralyzed by fear. He thought about running, packing a bag, getting in his car, and disappearing. But where would he go? His face was all over the neighborhood. Everyone knew him. And then there was Rosa, his sister. She would never forgive him. The sound of his phone buzzing snapped him out of his daze. It was Rosa. "Hey, Miguel," she said cheerfully when he answered. "Just checking in. Did Vanessa pick up the books? She hasn't come home yet, and it's getting late." Miguel's heart sank. He forced himself to sound calm. "Yeah, she came by," he said. "She just left a little while ago. Maybe she got caught up somewhere." "Oh," Rosa said, her tone shifting. "That's not like her. She usually texts me if she's running late." "I'm sure she's fine," Miguel said quickly. "You know how kids are these days, always on their phones. She probably got distracted." Rosa paused for a moment. "Yeah, you're probably right. I'll give her a little more time." As soon as the call ended, Miguel knew he was out of time. He couldn't hide this. The truth was going to come out whether he liked it or not. At 11:47 p.m., Miguel dialed 911. His hands shook as he held the phone to his ear. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher asked. I need help, Miguel said, his voice trembling. My niece, she's not breathing. Sir, is she with you now? Yes, she's in the basement, he said, glancing at the tarp. What happened to her? Miguel hesitated. I don't know. I found her like this. Please, just send someone. The dispatcher assured him that help was on the way. Miguel hung up and sat down on the basement stairs, his head in his hands. He could already hear the sirens in the distance. When the paramedics arrived, Miguel led them to the basement. He tried to keep his composure, but his hands trembled as he pointed to the tarp. She's under there, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The paramedics pulled back the tarp and immediately knew there was nothing they could do. Vanessa had been dead for hours. Her neck showed clear signs of strangulation, and there were bruises on her arms and wrists, indicating a struggle. One of the paramedics turned to Miguel, his expression grim. Sir, what happened here? I told you. I found her like this, Miguel stammered. I don't know what happened. But his story didn't add up. There was no sign of a break-in, no evidence of an intruder, and Miguel's nervous demeanor only heightened their suspicions. The police arrived shortly after, and Miguel was taken upstairs for questioning. Detective Laura Martinez, a seasoned investigator with the Trenton Police Department, was assigned to the case. She had seen her fair share of tragedies over the years, but something about this one felt different. When she arrived at the scene, she immediately noticed the tension in the air. The house was eerily quiet, except for the murmurs of officers and paramedics. What do we have? She asked one of the officers. Deceased female, 19 years old, the officer said. Body was found in the basement. Signs of a struggle and strangulation. The uncle claims he found her like this. Detective Martinez nodded, her mind already racing. Where's the uncle now? He's upstairs. We're questioning him. Martinez made her way to the basement, where Vanessa's body was still lying on the floor. She crouched down, examining the bruises on her neck and arms. It was clear this wasn't an accident. Whoever did this knew her, she muttered to herself. Upstairs, Miguel sat on the couch, his leg bouncing nervously as he answered the officer's questions. I told you. I found her like that, he said. She came over to get some books and then, I don't know. I went downstairs and saw her like that. Detective Martinez joined the questioning, her sharp eyes studying Miguel's every move. Mr. Alvarez, she said, her tone calm but firm, did you hear anything unusual tonight? Any sounds of a struggle? No, Miguel said quickly. I was upstairs the whole time. I didn't hear anything. And you didn't see anyone else come into the house? No, he repeated, his voice rising slightly. It's just been me and Vanessa here. Martinez leaned forward. You seem nervous, Mr. Alvarez. Is there something you're not telling us? Miguel's eyes darted around the room. I just found my niece dead in my basement. How do you expect me to act? Martinez didn't respond right away. She just watched him, letting the silence stretch out. Finally, she stood up. We'll need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement, she said. Miguel nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Meanwhile, Rosa Ramirez was growing increasingly worried. Vanessa still hadn't come home, and her calls to Miguel were going straight to voicemail. When the police knocked on her door shortly after midnight, her heart sank. Ms. Ramirez, Detective Martinez began. May we come in? Rosa stepped aside, her hands trembling. What's going on? Is Vanessa okay? Martinez hesitated before answering. I'm sorry to inform you that your daughter was found deceased earlier this evening. Rosa's knees buckled, and she let out a wail that echoed through the house. Diego, who had been playing video games in his room, came running out, his face pale. What do you mean she's gone? Rosa cried. She was just at Miguel's house. What happened to her? We're still investigating, Martinez said gently, but we'll do everything we can to find out the truth. The autopsy confirmed what Detective Martinez had suspected. Vanessa's death was a homicide. The cause of death was strangulation, and there were defensive wounds on her hands and arms, indicating she had fought back. The report also revealed something even more disturbing. There were signs of attempted sexual assault. Martinez knew this case was about to take a much darker turn. When Detective Laura Martinez received the autopsy report, she sat alone in her office, flipping through the pages with a mixture of determination and dread. The medical examiner had confirmed what she already suspected. Vanessa Ramirez had died from asphyxiation due to manual strangulation. The bruises on her neck were consistent with hands gripping her throat, and the defensive wounds suggested she had put up a fierce fight. But the most horrifying detail was the evidence of attempted sexual assault. While there was no indication of penetration, the bruising and torn fabric around Vanessa's clothing painted a grim picture of what had happened in those final moments of her life. Martinez leaned back in her chair, exhaling sharply. This wasn't just a murder. It was a crime of rage, betrayal, and control. And every piece of evidence pointed to Miguel Alvarez. Back at the station, Miguel Alvarez was sitting in an interrogation room, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. He had been there for hours, his story unchanged. He claimed he had found Vanessa's body in the basement and had no idea what had happened to her. Detective Martinez entered the room, holding a manila folder. She placed it on the table and sat across from him, her expression calm but unyielding. "Miguel," she began, "we've gone over your story, and there are some things that don't add up." Miguel shifted in his chair. "I already told you everything I know." Martinez opened the folder and pulled out photos from the crime scene. She placed them in front of Miguel, one by one. "This is Vanessa," she said, pointing to a photo of her lifeless body. "These bruises on her neck, they didn't happen by accident. Someone put their hands on her and strangled her. And the defensive wounds on her arms, that means she fought back." Miguel's eyes darted away from the photos. "I didn't do this," he muttered. Martinez leaned forward. "Then who did? You told us no one else was in the house. There's no sign of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder. You were the last person to see her alive." "I don't know," Miguel shouted, slamming his fist on the table. Martinez didn't flinch. She watched him carefully, noting the sweat on his brow, the way his hands shook. "We also found evidence of an attempted sexual assault," she said, her voice steady. "Vanessa's clothes were torn, and there are bruises on her thighs. Do you want to explain that, Miguel?" His face turned pale. "I didn't touch her," he said quickly. "I swear to God, I didn't touch her." "Then how do you explain the DNA we found under her fingernails?" Martinez asked. "She fought back, Miguel. She scratched her attacker, and when we test that DNA, it's going to come back to you." Miguel's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked like a man cornered, his lies unraveling around him. When the news of Vanessa's death broke, the Ramirez family was consumed by grief. Rosa Ramirez could barely function, her days filled with tears and unanswered questions. Diego, Vanessa's 14-year-old brother, retreated into himself, refusing to talk to anyone. "I trusted him," Rosa said through sobs during a conversation with Detective Martinez. "Miguel was my brother. I let him into our home. I let him near my children. How could he do this?" Martinez didn't have an answer. She had seen cases like this before, crimes committed by someone the victim knew and trusted, but it didn't make it any easier to explain. The rest of the family was equally devastated. Vanessa's cousins, aunts, and uncles gathered at Rosa's house in the days following the murder, trying to support her while grappling with their own shock and anger. "How could Miguel do something like this?" one of Vanessa's cousins asked. "He's family. He's supposed to protect us, not hurt us." The betrayal cut even deeper because Miguel had been such a prominent figure in Vanessa's life. He had attended her birthday parties, cheered her on at school events, and acted as a father figure after her dad passed away. Now, he was the monster who had taken her life. After hours of questioning, Miguel Alvarez finally broke down. Faced with the mounting evidence against him, he confessed to killing Vanessa. "I didn't mean to do it," he said, his voice shaking. "It just happened." According to Miguel, he had been drinking heavily that night and had become angry when Vanessa rejected his advances. He claimed he didn't plan to hurt her, but when she tried to leave, he snapped. "I just wanted her to listen," he said. "I didn't mean to kill her." But Detective Martinez wasn't buying his excuses. "You didn't mean to kill her, but you put your hands around her neck and squeezed until she couldn't breathe. That's not an accident, Miguel. That's murder." Miguel was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, attempted sexual assault, and a host of other charges. The news of Vanessa's murder spread quickly through Elmwood Park, leaving the community in shock. Vanessa had been a well-loved figure in the neighborhood, a bright, promising young woman with her whole life ahead of her. Vigils were held in her honor, with friends and neighbors gathering to light candles and share memories of her. She was such a kind person, one of her high school teachers said during a local news interview. She had this energy that brightened every room she walked into. It's heartbreaking to think that someone so full of life could be taken from us like this. But the community's grief was mixed with outrage. Many people struggled to understand how someone like Miguel, who seemed so normal on the surface, could commit such a heinous act. "It just goes to show you never really know someone," one neighbor said. "You think you're safe, that your kids are safe, but monsters can be hiding in plain sight." Miguel Alvarez's trial began 6 months after Vanessa's murder. The courtroom was packed with reporters, family members, and community members who wanted to see justice served. The prosecution painted Miguel as a predator who had betrayed his family's trust and taken advantage of Vanessa's innocence. "This was not a crime of passion," the prosecutor said during his opening statement. "This was a calculated act of violence committed by a man who knew exactly what he was doing." The defense, meanwhile, tried to portray Miguel as a troubled man who had acted out of character in a moment of drunken rage. "He's not a monster," Miguel's attorney argued. "He's a man who made a terrible mistake." But the evidence against Miguel was overwhelming. The DNA under Vanessa's fingernails, the bruises on her neck and body, and his own confession all pointed to his guilt. Rosa Ramirez took the stand during the trial, her voice trembling as she described the devastation her brother's actions had caused. "I trusted him," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I let him into my home, into my children's lives, and he betrayed us in the worst way possible." After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 2 hours before reaching a verdict. Miguel Alvarez was found guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder and attempted sexual assault. When the verdict was read, Rosa broke down in tears, clutching a photo of Vanessa to her chest. Miguel showed little emotion as he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, his future sealed. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the Ramirez family, life after Vanessa's death was a constant struggle. Rosa quit her job at the hospital, unable to focus on anything other than her grief. Diego started therapy to help him cope with the loss of his sister, but the pain of her absence was always there. The family created a scholarship fund in Vanessa's name, using the money to help other young women pursue their dreams of higher education. "We want her memory to live on," Rosa said during a memorial event. "She was such a bright light in this world, and we want to make sure that light never goes out."